Tens of thousands of football fans came to Highbury. Electrifying!
Yes, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Cannon Podcast. I am here. I finally have the power. I am your host, George VAFC, and I'm here with my favorite human on this earth, Mr. Wohan. How are you, good sir?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I've been battling a cold for the past week, but I'm getting there now. And I went to the gym today, just before recording. I don't know, but you know when you have those types of sessions where you're like, oh, you're really struggling? I felt that today. And then it was raining as well, and yeah, a bit of a mess. So I've got my hood on today. Just to hide any of the atrocities.
He's got that, you're really giving me that Kermit the Frog meme. Yes. Oh my goodness, mate. Yeah, you know what, we were just talking off air, and you know, it's kind of a case of, we feel like we're in a weird place with this whole no Arsenal thing going on. I don't know about people listening right now, but it's just strange at this point in the season for me, where I feel like things have been go to put ourselves off. And you know what? Maybe where we'll first start, this whole idea of Dubai. There's a big section on, you know, X that are going to be talking about how, I don't know why we're celebrating or not celebrating Dubai. There's this weird narrative about how we're in this position because we failed, fundamentally. We're able to go to Dubai because we haven't progressed in certain competitions. I don't know, mate. Like, I'm battling between, I think Dubai as itself, the squad needed Dubai. I'm looking at what the squad has gotten up to this point, and I'm saying, look, even if we had progressed and done better in cup competitions, namely, you know, the FA Cup and of course our showing in the Carabao Cup, for me, the way we performed was the disappointment across two legs, at least the scoreline. And, you know, there were some things that we could have improved on, I think, as far as cup competitions go, which is, I think, a fair criticism of Mikel in general, if you were looking across his tenure. You know, I think certain cup competitions have been put on the back foot for the league. And you can understand why there's frustration on both ends. But for you, mate, like, you look at Dubai, what do you think, did the squad need it, in your opinion? And do you share, you know, the criticisms of potentially that we're in this position because of failure? Or latter, so, you know, how does the squad interpret Dubai as well, you know, in general, in the context of the season?
I mean, I agree with you in terms of, I felt the squad needed Dubai, especially when you consider the fact that we played 9 games in January, you know, and it's been a very difficult fixture schedule, a lot of games, and you consider the injuries that we have sustained with obviously Saka towards the back end of December, then Gabriel Jesus doing his ACL as well, and now Martinelli going down as well. I felt this team just needed a break, and, you know, obviously we'd be lying to say, you know, we would rather be in Dubai as opposed to going through in the Carabao Cup, because obviously we would have wanted that outcome for sure, but we're not in that competition anymore. So I think it's a case of there's still a lot to play for come the end of the season, you know, and I think obviously we've spoken about the board in terms of the intentions and the ambitions in January, and it suggested to me, and I think you feel exactly the same in terms of how it feels like from their perspective, the season, nothing substantial is going to happen in the season now, in the Premier League or the Champions League. But I don't think that is the case. Well, I'm adamant that that's not the case with the manager and the players. And I just think that this break will give us a really good opportunity to go hard from now to the end of the season. You know, because I think our fixture schedule, when you look at it, it's looking a lot better. And again, obviously, we'd rather be in the cup competitions, and there's fair criticism towards Mikel on that. But I think for what we have right now, I think the fixtures are looking good in terms of how they're spaced out, and the squad needed it. And I think we go back to last season and how that post-Dubai form from 2024 and the way Arsenal were able to operate at a 100-point pace, a lot of it is attributed towards that break that we had. And let's hope that that's going to be the case again today. I mean, I wonder if the science behind it, I reckon you could give us more insight into this in terms of, does that science of going to a different climate, a lot warmer country, help with recovery and allow them to be stronger going into the latter stages of the season? Obviously, it's not the business end of the season, but we're now approaching a time in which it is serious, you know, and it's a case of racking up points, especially in the Premier League. So I wonder if there is something that's science related that is giving everyone confidence that this is exactly what the squad needed.
So from a medical perspective, you're not going to get a benefit in a 7-day or a 10-day camp, no matter where it is. And, you know, when you talk about some benefits, there is a chance to say that preseason makes sense because you're going through several weeks periods and, you know, you're going through maybe a month of loading the body. Whereas in this 7 to 10 days, none of what Dubai has done is to add muscle, change fitness. You as like a trainer would, 10 days is not enough time. Typically muscle changes, when you're looking at it, they need a minimum of 12 weeks actually to go and have a difference. And so that's why preseason lasts the way it does in the summer. And even that has been reduced now. It's no longer 12 weeks, you know. So from, I think, a training perspective, physical wise, there isn't benefits. But I mean, if you're going to ask me mental, and I don't want to get into people critiquing it because there is a huge mental aspect to it. And the only thing that I bring up is because when you have a look at what was said about Dubai last year, in terms of the familial impact, in terms of getting people back on side, and we'll try to talk about what that means in the context of maybe players will discover post-Dubai. But from the players that are already here, what it does in terms of being able to, in the middle of a season, relax and take your mind away from something that admittedly is a very difficult task, very arduous. And, you know, I think from a team that was running on fumes, it's less about removing the strain of a match, but the mental strain of having played every 3 days for the last, 6 weeks or 2 months, where we've played in an outrageous number of games, and the focus to go. And, you know, I just want to come from the perspective of, if anybody in life has studied for a big test or an assessment, you go through a burnout period. Yeah. You know, I've done it through myself recently with this PhD. Like, I'm so glad to be on the other side in my first step here. But there was times when I felt burnout, and there's times when the squad is going to feel burnout, and there's times when Mikel himself is going to feel burnout. And I think that the importance of having a Dubai, by the way, it could have been anywhere in the world. I don't think it had to be Dubai specifically, but this idea that a team goes away, has an ability to have the families come over, have the families come and interact with each other. It brings a sense of a bookend to a season.
Togetherness as well, isn't it? It's
absolutely.
And do you know what it is as well, George? It's kind of like, as you allude to, in terms of in any walk of life, like, for example, when you start working, you know, you have, well, I don't know what it is for you, but in the UK, it tends to be around about 25 days of annual leave. You have to take 3 off for Christmas. So you got 22 days throughout the year in which you can use to give yourself that opportunity to check out and to, you know, distance yourself away from that normal routine that you have. And I can speak from my experience where, you know, you've got a project, you've got deadlines, and you're looking to get to that deadline and get over the line, and it can be very mentally taxing. And then you have that opportunity to go away abroad, and mentally it changes you. And then when you come back, you feel a lot more fresh. You feel like you're going to be able to offer more at work, and you're going to be more productive. And I think maybe that's what it is, the driver of it, in terms of the social aspect and just getting away from that normal routine. Because obviously, as you alluded to, these players have been playing every single 3 days. It's the same as a 9-to-5 job, you know, where you know what you're going to be doing every single day, barring the weekends. You know, you have that set structure. And for the players, it's kind of been that same thing. As I mentioned, you know, 9 games in January. So you're playing a game, 3 games every week, you know, like Saturday, Wednesday, Sunday, on repeat. And that can be taxing. And that's where I think the social aspect is probably what is the biggest driver here. But I found that interesting, actually, when you mentioned about the pre-season and how it's been shortened. And do you think that could perhaps be one of the reasons why we're seeing more injuries as well, in terms of pre-season being shortened, less recovery, not the optimal opportunity to kind of reset your body? Maybe there's something there.
No doubt. I think that look, football's going, I don't want, everyone's dealing with it. So when you start to talk and you start to complain, people start to say, well, you're only doing it because of where you are and your achievements and your objectives. But just factually, the players have been yelling at it for years. And it's not just the schedule, which is incredible and it's insane. It's because when they're talking about the idea that you can't Dubai. Yeah. Right? Like, when you're talking about recovery, it's such an important piece. One of the biggest things, actually, that when you're talking about training, and anybody that's trained for any significant period of time will tell you that recovery is just as important as the loading phase, as the phase where you're trying to build muscle. And so if you're sat there and you just think logically, like I don't think people realize, but when you work out, you're ripping apart your muscle.
Yeah, exactly.
That's actually the anatomy of it. In order to build it back stronger, you must rip it apart. Okay, and then when it's broken, the body is adding more proteins, and the reason it's doing it is because it's saying, okay, my defense was low, I've got to add more here because I ripped it last time. Now, if you don't give it enough time to physically add the pieces that you're ingesting to it, which is what recovery is, you're just going to be in a constant state of mini injuries throughout the entirety of the season. And it's what leads to these major hamstrings, soft muscular kind of injuries in general, as far as ACL ruptures that we're seeing, and we're seeing them rife kind of across the game. So yes, I think the way the schedule is, we're talking a crazy amount of impact on the physical nature. Then we're talking about preseason, which I do feel has been gotten shorter and shorter and shorter in the last 4 or 5 years. And you're sat there, and from a fan's perspective, we want it all because we just want
exactly
all of this now. But what's the impact on these athletes if you're not going to give them a chance to load and change their body, which is what preseason is built for? Okay, you're looking to make some small physical adjustments. That's the only time you have, because again, to make physical change, you're talking months.
Yeah.
When you're talking weeks, there's no physical change that you're going to do as far as a training regiment's concerned in a week, in 10 days. None of that is going to be affected. But when you start to go into preseason and you start to saying, okay, originally we had June, July, and most of August. Now it's June, July, August, because the Premier League has started at the beginning of August now. So now you're immediately 2.5 months in. Talk about the regularity of all these freaking international tournaments that have been happening, and how quickly they've been happening. That 2-month period now becomes 2 to 3 weeks. And then boom, you're back in training, and we're sitting there expecting these athletes to be perfect and to not have a level of working their way up to their top level. It's insane to me. I think it's actually insane.
I think what it is, I think fans in general have a lack of empathy in that aspect because of obviously the wages and the money that footballers are earning. I mean, this is the classic type of conversation that you have amongst people in football fans. It will always be injuries, the fixture schedule, there's no excuses, they're on this amount of money, they need to get on with it. But there is empathy involved to it as well. And I think that the COVID outbreak is what has messed everything up in terms of the fixtures constantly being piled up on each other, especially with the international tournaments as well. The World Cup was moved because of that, and then they had to squeeze that in midway through the 22-23 season because of the COVID impact. And I feel like we've never been able to recover from that in terms of being able to reduce the schedule and that congestion. And so many players are coming out and saying it. Rodri said it before he tore his ACL in terms of the number of games that they have to play. It's not sustainable. And managers have came out saying very similar things. So yeah, I just hope that, obviously from a selfish point of view, and we kind of were talking about it off air, and I've missed Arsenal, even though this has been a good break for the players because of the number of games they've had to play. But it felt weird not watching them on the weekend, especially when you're seeing all the other teams feature. But I think it's empathy. That's what it comes down to in terms of how a fan views it.
No, absolutely. And from a certain perspective, this isn't even just an Arsenal problem. I mean, at some point, something's going to happen where the game's getting younger and we're going to lose a global star. I'm knocking on every single wood, but I'm looking at Lamine Yamal. Yeah. Right now, what you've noticed, Rodri should have been, in my opinion, objectively a shock to the world. Yeah. This is a guy that has never gotten injured, that's a consummate professional, takes care of his body massively all throughout his career. He said before it's too much and then has the injury, right? I'm looking at Bukayo Saka, who, again, now this is an Arsenal perspective, and now people are going to go and sit there. It's biased because of what you're coming from, but this is a guy that just doesn't get injured, and he finally got a muscular injury. And I'm looking, everybody's favorite player is going to go through this, by the way. Everybody's. And I just don't know what's going to snap. We're going to in my opinion, it's going to take something like a Wayne Rooney-esque level talent to fall at the age of 22 from a serious injury. That I think that's the only thing. And even then, money will not allow this. So from some perspective, I hope that coaches and teams in general unite, because this is not sustainable. And I'm just worried that we're going to see more of this. And then it comes down to the issue of, okay, if you're accepting that they're tools, they're just going to be used like this, like and abused, actually, is the right term to it. Just get bigger squads. And that to me is such a capitalist point of view when you're looking at these players as human beings in general. So, and that's the point of Dubai. That, just to circle this back, Dubai for me isn't a physical release, it's a mental release. And it is, I think something that Arsenal have actually been very proactive in general. I don't see too many teams who are in the same position, by the way, because there's a couple teams out of the cups that can do a trip like this, but aren't doing a trip like this. And it's a decision that Arsenal have done in consecutive years that I think is, if you want to call it hogwash, but is a mental health break from the season. And if Germany has a winter break, I think the Premier League is going to so-called have this, maybe not Dubai break, but a mental health break for teams competing at the top level.
And I think you'll be able to see a much higher level of performance in the games as well, if teams are able to go through that sort of process. And just generally, it could be anywhere, but I don't know about you, but right now in the UK, the weather's miserable. It's cold, going away to somewhere that is nice, that just does wonders for you as well. And you're escaping the winter. But those are soft factors, aren't they? And I think, it's kind of like the narrative is rewarding failure going to Dubai. But the way I look at it is, well, if there is evidence to suggest that a Dubai break or a break in general helps the players to be able to sustain a level of performance going into the business end of the season, I'm all for that. And that's what should be every fan's priority. We want this club, we want this team to be able to go hard come the end of the season, which we'll get into the season aims. And the only way in which we're going to be able to achieve some really good aims is by having this sort of break and having this mental checkout in which they can just distance themselves from their normal routine and then go into what it is, back into your routine after the break.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of people that are going to be using this break as to transition in terms of trying to find new players. Yes. We're looking at the squad, and look, mate, I can't not start. I'll just get right into it. Benjamin White is the player I am most excited for. Yeah. I really pushed back. I thought he got an incredible amount of undeserved criticism. Yeah. I thought that he got an incredible amount of actually really unfair, inferior kind of criticisms to Timber. Like, there was this weird thing that when Timber came back, what I was seeing is he was undoubtedly the starting right back. And I sat there and I thought, no, I'm really uncomfortable with making that. I'm really glad we finally got brilliant competition and rotation in a position we needed it. But as far as guaranteed starting, have we not watched and seen that this is the best performing right back in the last 2 years?
2 seasons,
both ways.
2 seasons.
And mate, I'm sorry, but he is a huge part to why, for me, if we're playing the science experiment game, we've seen this team without Odegaard. Saka was able to handle a lot of the creative burden. Now we see it without Saka and White. Odegaard is a player that we'll talk about a little bit later in the pod, struggling right now. But if you want to get a good Martin Odegaard, I think Ben White's critical to that. And he's going to, along with Ethan Nwaneri, approximate the impact of no Saka, which is a really difficult thing to do. And I really don't think people have clocked or understood how important that is, because Ethan Nwaneri on his own can't do it. I don't think that, there was one player. You can't replace Bukayo Saka with one player. It has to be a team effort. And for me, Benjamin White is probably one of the most underrated people in the squad for me, at least from what I've seen in criticisms. I don't know. How do you feel?
Mate, I completely hear. I think sometimes there's a lot of recency bias, and I'll get into both Timber and White in a second, but I think with Ben, it's kind of like some of his weaknesses, and I always go to the 1v1 wide defending, and it isn't to the standard that we obviously want, and we've seen Ben struggle in those moments, and then it's kind of using that as a way of saying Ben White as a player needs to be replaced. And I think that's really unfair, because Jurrien Timber has weaknesses that you could make a very similar argument to as well. You know, like Jurrien Timber, I think his passing in deeper areas isn't as progressive, isn't as brave as a Ben White. And that's a massive part to our game model that Ben gives us. You think of that floated ball over the top, that trigger in terms of releasing it early for a Saka to latch onto. Think of Liverpool. You know, those are the sorts of types of passes that we have needed in games against the toughest types of teams that we come up that we struggle against. You know, your Newcastles, those teams who are looking to squeeze the centre of the pitch and looking to make it very difficult for you to progress and find space in those sorts of areas in the middle of the park. So you need that ability to find that ball, fire that ball in behind with really good weight and execution, and Ben does that time and time again. And in terms of him just in general, I think like a £50 million purchase. And since then, you know, there was a lot of criticism on Ben White, especially when he came to the club. And obviously the nightmare debut, people will call it, against Ivan Toney, and struggling in that game. And the narrative that was building on Ben White after that. But you saw a player in 21-22 who formed an excellent partnership with Gabriel. And people forget this. You know, that partnership was fantastic, barring the last couple of months, and that was when Ben picked up an injury, and he was playing through it as well. I remember the Spurs game when we lost 3-0, and we were all thinking, should Ben White be risking this game? Should he be playing? And it was that sort of worry that we all had because of the fact that he was playing through injury. And then you go to the last 2 years outside of this season. Now, in terms of performances, no right back has been as consistent as Ben White. No right back. And that's also considering last season, the first half of the campaign, I attributed it as his worst spell in an Arsenal shirt. And it still wasn't a bad level. But the reason why it was his poorest spell was because he was playing for injury. And he mentioned it in that interview with Ben Foster. And like his threshold for pain is pretty high. And that's why he's able to do that. And he's always been that guy who has stepped up when others haven't been able to give us that sort of consistency in terms of availability at right back, you know. And then we come to a situation now in which I agree. I think with Ødegaard, when I look at Arsenal's best attacking unit on that side, it's when Ødegaard drops deep, and we'll talk about Ødegaard obviously in terms of his role and how that will be changing with the likelihood of Zubimendi coming in. But Ødegaard dropping, Saka coming inside, and Ben White making that run on the outside. Runners is what Ødegaard needs, and that's what Ben White gives them on the outside. You know, Timber can overlap, he can give you that quality too, but it's different with Ben. You know, and we've seen this time and time again. This is the whole debate of Timber and White. The beauty of it is that they excel in different things. Like their best qualities come in different areas. Like Timber, in terms of his ability to receive inside the block, turn, carry, drive forward. His 1v1 defending, it's fantastic. His passing in deeper areas, I don't think he's brave enough and composed enough. His passing gets better the higher he goes up. Whereas Ben, yes, you can attribute the 1v1 wide defending as a big weakness within his game, but then you can look at the passing that he gives from deeper areas, the runs that he makes on the outside, and the quality he gives you on that front. That is superior than Timber. So it's really exciting how we've got two players who give us different options and solutions to combat what the opposition is trying to do. And that's what really excites me. And obviously, I think Timber as well, recently, he has looked tired. He's looked fatigued because of the number of games he's had to play. Having someone like Ben White come in and to allow that right-hand side to be fresh, I think it's massive. And especially with Ethan Wanyeri, which, you know, you'll know way more than me about him, even though obviously we are all aware of his talents. But when you're talking about Ethan's best qualities, it is coming inside, and it is having that trademark type of finish that we have seen a number of times already. And that is what Ben White can give him, that opportunity to do that on a consistent basis, better than Timber. But there are also obviously things that Timber does better than White, and that's the beauty of what we have.
Absolutely. And I think that when you have a top performing right back in the league of the last 2 years coming back to your squad, it's a benefit, no matter what. And, you know, when you have a look at even William Saliba, protecting him from injury, what's the impact on Ben White coming back to the squad with Timber rotating? It's huge. And that for me has been what Arsenal's team has lacked quite a bit in this last 6 weeks. We have lacked people able to come in, give the main guys a rest so that we can see the top level. You're looking at Kai. You're looking at Odegaard. I'm looking at these players who we know they're not performing to a level that, in my opinion, we have seen in the past, but we can't see it. We can't see it with the number of games. We can't see it with the amount that they have to play, and that's going to be huge. I think Mikel's can't wait for Ben White to get back into the squad in general. And for yourself, though, I mean, that's one player. Is there another player that you're looking back on Dubai and thinking beyond the boy, the man, the myth, the legend, the one that makes us all happy?
I think we should talk about him because I think we can get into the conversation. Right, I got a bit worried, right, on X, and I need you to kind of squash my worries.
Did you see the scar?
Yeah, George, can you just tell me about the scar first? Is it okay? Please.
No. See, what happens, my dear Wohan, when there is surgery under the knife, there's no scars, typically. And this is categorically the worst thing that we could have seen. Yeah, mate, like maybe people will appreciate what these injuries actually mean when you see stuff like that. Because that's the reality in terms of what the fix is, even if it's a 2-month fix, and even if it is something that I think a lot of people who know this type of injury aren't worried about long-term issues. But it's surgery. You know what I mean? Like, you're going under the knife. And look, I think as far as Bukayo Saka goes, I made a tweet last night. He was literally on my mind as if we're sat here thinking about the pod. I said, how amazing is it? First off, I'm honored to see him play.
Yep.
I don't think we as fans understand that we are seeing a living legend play. He will retire as the greatest. He already is for me. I'm ready to put that claim on him. The greatest right winger, not only have I seen, but I don't think in the history of Arsenal we've had a better right winger so far than Bukayo Saka. And let alone what he will achieve at the end of his career. But how often can you sit there as a fan and say, I've lived through the best player to have ever played in my position there? That's something that's quite special. And, he was on course for a season that I don't think we've seen. Yeah. People aren't talking about it. He's still leading the big chance misses, or not the big chance missed, but the big chance created charts. The chances created charts, having missed almost 2 months already of the season, he is still in the lead for. I mean, I don't know, can you put into context what kind of a season you felt that he was having prior to injury and what that miss is like?
I mean, there was a tweet that I had out before, and I looked at every single game that Bukayo Saka featured in this season. I really want to find it. But it looked at each game and how Bukayo Saka, and this is where it goes back to the big chances created, there was a consistent knack of producing at least one golden moment in every single game. At least one. Even in the games in which he wasn't at the level we know he's capable of, he was still producing the quality to bail us out. Like, for example, Newcastle, away from home. I think anybody being fair about that game earlier in the season in the league felt Arsenal didn't deserve anything from it. But Bukayo Saka puts it on a plate for Declan Rice in like the last couple of minutes. Literally on a plate. That's just one example. It happened time and time again. I remember the Leicester game. I don't even remember the Leicester game. He broke all sorts of records in terms of chances created, shot creating actions, everything in that game. And he was on course to having a ridiculous season. The only thing that kind of was he wasn't necessarily getting the praise for it was because Mohamed Salah's also having a ridiculous season as well. In which you extrapolate his numbers, he was on course to getting 70 GA over a season, which is absolutely crazy. But I think with Saka, the right wing point you made, that claim of being the best right winger you've seen at Arsenal, that's a massive claim as well. And I'm thinking over the years and when I've been watching, there's definitely a conversation there. There's a massive conversation there. I mean, you're looking at obviously Freddie Ljungberg, for example, if you're going all the way back. But I can't really think of many who can compete with him. I mean, Freddie Ljungberg had that fantastic season in particular in I think it was the 01-02 season. But yeah, I think with Saka, what makes him really special for me is since he's broken into the team as a teenager, he's performed in every single environment. When we were at our worst time, he operated in 7 different roles as a teenager, and he was the one who stood out in the darkest times, to then becoming undoubtedly top 2 right winger in the world. People may argue 3 with Yamal, but I think Saka is firmly in that top 2 category with Salah. And then you've got a player who consistently performs for England always top 3, at least best performers for his country in every single major tournament that he's been in. And I think, naturally, when you lose a player like Saka, it is the equivalent of Liverpool losing a player like Salah. It is the equivalent of Man City losing a player like Haaland in terms of that productivity, that output, and the drive that he gives you there. And we did a data pod with Data George, looking at the impact of Saka and in terms of not just goals and assists, but the contribution of those goals and assists over the past 3 years that are in non-winning game states. And Saka beats Salah, he beats Haaland, and he rivals Salah on goals as well. On assists, he surpasses everyone. On goals, he rivals Salah as well in terms of the importance of goals. And that's something that I looked at this squad and thinking we need that, because it's not just Saka scoring the third or fourth goal. It's not just Saka assisting the third or fourth goal. It's Saka contributing in the big moments when the team needs him. And that's what we miss massively. And I can't wait for when he comes back. I'm hoping it's soon.
Yeah, mate, like, you know what, and from my perspective, it is game changing. Like, I look at our team, and, you know, he is the heartbeat of our team. He is what this team is going to be built off of, and he is somebody that is going to take us to the promised land of major trophies. Like, it is him. And so, as far as coming back, by the way, how do we make sure that we plan for the long-term future of Bukayo Saka here? Because for me, there's a lot riding. There's a lot of anxiety in the fan base right now as far as winning and winning now.
Yeah.
Are you afraid about Mikel in terms of his ability to integrate Saka? Because we'll talk about some of the health implications on it. But as far as what you're like, where your head is at with it, when I have a look at it, this is why Ben White coming back is so crucial to me. Because if you can find a way that the team, which has already shown to reliably create without Saka, but create with a similar threat, not the same threat, but a similar level of threat, that means that I can integrate Saka at my own pace. I don't have to feel rushed to get him started in every single game, which, I don't know, like, there's a fear there. There is a fear based on how we have gone out of the cup competitions, the distance between us and Liverpool right now, the anxiety within the club. Where do you stand on protecting our biggest asset in the team?
Yeah, I think the Ben White point, again, it goes back to who we have right now at right wing. And naturally, when we look at our options, everyone will say Ethan Nwaneri stylistically is the best fit to kind of come in the absence of Saka. And in that aspect, if we want to allow Ethan Nwaneri to thrive, as we've already mentioned, you need a Ben White. You need a Ben White to be able to take that burden of him being touchline and to get him more inside. Like, I remember the game against Brighton, right? And Ethan scored in that game. But I actually didn't think he had a very good game, where he was isolated many times 1v1 on the touchline. And his movements were very premeditated against Estupiñán, and Estupiñán was winning that battle every single time after Nwaneri scored. So the way you can kind of take that responsibility away from Ethan and to allow him to thrive more is by having someone on the outside, and that's what Ben White gives you. And that's why I've always felt with Timber and White, going back to that topic, it's like when we've had Martinelli on the right-hand side, I felt Timber complements him pretty good with that dynamic. Whereas if we're looking at in possession in the final third, how we can generate our biggest threat, I think that works well. But when I'm looking at Saka and looking at Ethan Nwaneri, I just think Ben White naturally, from an attacking point of view, is a better fit, especially with Ben's willingness to be more dominant on the outside. And that's where I think, and this is where there's another player that I want to look at as well in a bit, but I think with Ben White, he is the way in which he can unlock two players in both Ødegaard and Nwaneri, and that can help us ease Saka in as opposed to throwing him in every single game. And that's where it's always about partnerships. And the biggest frustration that we've had this season for Mikel is, you know, we kind of compare him to Pep, and the differences, there's loads of differences, and one of the big ones is that Mikel needs continuity in certain partnerships in order for you to see the best football under his stewardship. Whereas Pep is more of a chop and change type of guy, you know, and that's something that we've not been able to have. So that is something I think that is the key, you know, in terms of being able to pick a consistent 11 and have certain dynamics that are working well that can allow us to ease Saka in as opposed to throwing him in and asking him to play every single game.
Yeah, and I think that, again, the biggest thing when I have a look at this team and I have a look at this squad, Martinelli getting injured doesn't happen when you have a Ben White and Ethan Nwaneri carrying that threat, because you can rotate him a lot more. Yeah. You can add a Trossard on the left when Ethan, Odegaard, and Ben White are playing.
Yeah.
Like, when you add threat to a team, you ease the load elsewhere. And there are certain people, namely Kai Havertz, which I'm going to ask you, that's my last player on the Dubai trip that I think needed Dubai. We needed to put him in cotton wool.
You can say that again.
I mean, it's the one player that I think, of all the failures of the window, he was the biggest loser from the situation.
I agree.
And look, you know what? I think this is the one time we may disagree, because I think Kai Havertz is somebody that maybe me and you, I think we're pretty similar in terms of how we rate the talent. But I think that you, as far as what he is as a center forward, have a little bit more faith than I do necessarily in it. Where do you stand on how much of this issue that we've seen with Kai Havertz is fitness? And how do you balance that with, for me, the valid criticism on his touch in the last couple months?
Yeah.
Because I've actually been less critical about the clinicalness. Like, that comes in and out. And also, I know Havertz, he's never going to be a killer. And I'm sorry if you want him to be, that will never be him. Yeah. But the benefit of him at center forward was outlet, coming in to help us play. And I just don't think he's done that in the last 6 weeks.
I think it's longer than the last 6 weeks. I've said on X, and I'm very out there in terms of being able to criticize players that I do like as well. And I think with Havertz, I think he's had pretty poor 2 months. You know, like 2 months. Like, I think it starts from that game against Crystal Palace. Do you remember that game in December? Palace away from home. Havertz scores, and you know it's all rosy. But I said, like, he didn't play well in that game. You know, and it started from that game in which we started to see a lot of inconsistencies in his performances. And for me, you know, we've mentioned this many times. I've always been someone in which I don't mind players missing chances. It's frustrating in the moment, but I don't mind it. You know, I'm not this person which, he needs to score in this chance, he needs to convert this. You know, I'm very much more of the idea that as a team, as a collective, you need to generate more threat to give your forward players more opportunities to score goals. You know, and that's where I stand. But where I have been disappointed with Havertz is the ability to hold the ball up and to be able to be that release valve, which I haven't seen for a while on a consistent basis. I felt Man City actually did it pretty well in many moments in that game, but outside of that, he's been really lacking. And the Newcastle game got completely bullied. Absolutely bullied, gave us no outlet. And the frustration was more of the touch as well, in which so many times he gets the ball and it's just a heavy touch and then the attack fizzles down. You know, but that's not the Havertz that we saw last season in the running. You know, the ability to kind of facilitate play, run the channels, bring others into the game. That David Raya constant ball, long ball into Havertz to allow us to win second balls. He's not doing that enough now. And I think that I believe you'll be able to see a better level of Havertz if you rotate him more and if you give other players that responsibility up front. But the issue is that we don't have that now. And I've always felt with Havertz, it's like, I'm very big on the potential that he can give you at centre forward, but I've always been someone in which you have to look at the market, and if there is someone who can be better in that role, you have to go and get him. That's how you are able to compete at the top level and to keep progressing as opposed to plateauing. And we've not given him that help in the January window, you know, and that's the biggest frustration for me, because Havertz, as you mentioned, being one of the big losers of this window, he is someone who's going to be rinsed like a bar of soap unless we start to use Trossard a bit more in that role, you know. And I don't think that is going to be beneficial to him, nor to the team, because I think with Havertz, it's like when he's good, he's really good, but when he's bad, he's really bad, you know. And that's where it is. Yeah. So there's never like a fine balance with Kai. It's like, if you want to see the best of Kai, go and look at the 2024 running. He was Arsenal's best attacker, in my opinion. Even better than Saka, our best player. But then the worst of Havertz is the last 2 months, in which you're seeing a player who's not even dominating Archie Gray. You know, so it's like, but do you feel like, obviously we differ on Havertz in a lot of aspects, but do you feel like the number of minutes that he's played this season so far and the workload, do you feel that has affected his overall game? Because the missed chances were always going to happen. We know this, you know, but it's the all-round game that has dropped off quite a bit.
Yeah. Okay. So no doubt, minutes. That's the case for any player, right? Like you have a red zone of minutes. You're going to be completing actions with a lot less efficiency.
Yeah.
I think what frustrates me about Kai Havertz the most is some of the things that I felt like he shouldn't be leaving with, which for me are a touch. And he has to be sturdy under contact and provide an outlet. If you're messing up your actions in general, if you're not able to consistently provide an outlet and you're not also going to be clinical either, then I start to ask questions because that's not 295,000 pounds a week in terms of what it could be. I think that means that you're a very good player, and I think you're probably somebody that I don't want to get rid of the squad ever because I look at you as a very versatile option. But when I start looking and I start building my plan A, my attributes, and I start to define, my biggest thing in podcasts now has been the attacking identity. I want to define that. And mate, like I struggle because I start to say, okay, how many players in the front four can you have on 300K a week or more? And what does that imply from an Arsenal perspective, right? So it has less to do with even Kai Havertz as a claim, but like let's talk about Arsenal's wage bill, right? Yep. And let's talk about funds and how much you can allow the 300K mark. Because let's assume Bukayo Saka is going to get there with his new contract renewal. Let's assume William Saliba is there or at least very close to it.
Yep.
Other than that, is it not just Kai Havertz that's at 300K a week necessarily?
Yeah, I mean, you got Partey he's not close. He's like 265, isn't he? But he looks like he's going to be leaving in the summer, isn't he? And Jesus, well,
he's on a free. And so I start to say, so I look at the squad, and this is where I think I start to differ, and I start to say, okay, if I want to build an attacking unit, that for me, X factor, the change with what the team needs is a 300K level talent. And I don't think it's, a depth piece. So if I'm demanding that as a fan, and I'm sitting there to say, okay, with Saka, that's one. I ideally want two more. Not just one, I want two more on that level, unless we differ on that. But I think for me, I want two more. Then I start to say, okay, so now I've got 4 players on 300K a week with Odegaard, who must be close.
Yeah, he is close.
You're potentially at 5. So then now I'm thinking, okay, if I've got 5, something's got to give. Unless we're sitting there saying that Arsenal are going to become this team, because, mate, I'm telling you, when you start putting these guys on 300K a week, Declan Rice is going to say, hey, what about me?
Yeah.
Gabriel, who's got his extension. Hey, what about me? Now, so I think the 300K mark is something that Arsenal have pushed back and done really well, by the way, to negotiate it. I thought Saka should have got it in the last contract, if I'm really being honest. But we're approaching this land. So now I'm starting to ask, and I'm asking different questions. So I'm no longer asking Kai, can you be a versatile piece that's very useful? I'm asking, can you be a difference maker in 85% of the matches? And when things aren't going well, can you still be a difference maker? Because that's the claim that Saka gets. That's the claim I'm actually having troubles with Odegaard to get to. And this is a brilliant segue where we can maybe talk about Martin Odegaard and his role, because it's the same question. And let's start out from the top. Let's ignore the NNT perspective. This is what's clouding people's discussion on this, 100% in my opinion. I am going to lay it out there. Let's say that we aren't in the camp of we want him to be shipped off to Mars. Okay? Now, what you're talking about is a player who, for me, at his very best, what is Odegaard's best attribute for you? If I was to soup up and give Odegaard all the rest in the world, all the best dynamics in the world, what do you see him as in a player sense? What are his superpowers?
We mentioned this in the TCP Live when we looked at those Mikel Arteta quotes to the Spanish media about Odegaard. And I disagree with Mikel in terms of where he sees him at his best. It's quite clear as day in terms of how the squad's evolving, where he sees Odegaard. And it is higher, and it is between lines as more of a traditional number 10.
Sorry, hold on. Can I just? But do you think that's where he sees him, or where he thinks the team needs to have him? I actually read it a little bit different.
Do you? I think that's where he sees him. I think that's where. I think that's where he sees him, George.
See, I thought opposite. I thought he feels that the team needs a 10.
Yeah.
And he's moving towards a true double pivot. And he's saying, I think Martin Odegaard thinks and does his best work, and I've been fighting him to stop going deep, to get higher, because I need my 10 to. If I'm going to commit to a double pivot, right, a true double pivot, and no longer have my inverting fullbacks make up that unit, that means that one of the lateral central midfielders can't drop into the space because now we've got too many people. So for me, maybe I'm wrong, but I read it more that he is looking at Odegaard as far as a system change, not describing what he is best as a player, but that he's going to need him, much in the same way that he looks at Martinelli. This is a guy that he said that was Suarez when he first had him, and now he's a touchline winger. That wasn't because he believes Martinelli's best as a touchline winger. I think it's because that's what the team needs. And what the team needs is that touchline option.
Yeah.
So this was my perspective, but I don't know.
But that's interesting, just going on the Martinelli thing, because I mentioned this to Alex, right? And I think with the way that we use the left winger, and we look at the system and what we ask for that player to do, it doesn't suit Martinelli. So then you're looking at a player who is going to reach his sell-by date eventually, if you're going to use him in that way. If you're going to use him in a different way, it's a different conversation, completely different conversation. And it's the same with Odegaard. But I did feel like when I was reading that, it felt, because Mikel was mentioning how, the day he gets closer to goal, that is where he's going to be able to hit 15 Premier League goals again. And he was kind of making that sort of comparison, even though I think there's also comments him saying it's not sustainable being able to hit that level of output again for him. But my feeling is that I think he thinks Odegaard is at his best in that role, which I don't agree with. I've always felt with Odegaard, his best role was 23, 24, post Newcastle, November time, in which Odegaard dropped deeper and he was given a lot of opportunity and a lot of license to facilitate play. Ironically, though, it's kind of like when Mikel mentioned before, I think it was post 22-23 where he had that 15 non-penalty goal season. Mikel mentioned how at the start of his life at Arsenal, it was him coming deeper and looking to pick the ball up and conduct play. But that's not where he wanted him. He pushed him higher. But then 23-24, he moves back a little bit deeper and he's facilitating play. And statistically, I think from like 2024 and onwards, only Xhaka and Rodri were having as many touches on the ball in the middle third than Martin Odegaard. And that was where he's at his best, But, and this is where it's interesting, because the Newcastle game, right? We all look at that big Odegaard chance as being a massive moment in the time. Forget about the tactical aspects of the game. And I mentioned, I think Newcastle thoroughly deserved to go through. But that's a massive moment. And that's what you need from your number 10 to be able to take that opportunity that comes your way there. And Odegaard didn't do well enough in that aspect in that moment. The things that he did do well in that game, if you watch it back, some of the times in which Arsenal were trying to play through pressure, Odegaard's coming really deep to pick the ball up and to find solutions. He's really good at that, But that's not going to be the role that this team is going to be asking him with the way Zubimendi is likely to come in. And with Zubimendi, I've been watching clips of him. I like him, but I don't love him, Zubimendi. I don't know your thoughts on it, but I've watched him. I think he's very Jorginho-like in terms of a lot of things. But in order for him to flourish, you need Declan Rice alongside him, predominantly, in order to mask his deficiency. So that is going to push Odegaard higher, and that's where this team is going. And it's a case of, can he give that same level of impact in that role next season? And I think he can do it well, but can he do it well enough? I don't know.
Okay, how I feel about this, right, is I look at the player and I see him doing his best work in the middle third. Yeah, fundamentally.
Yeah, agree.
And I see a player that himself is most comfortable when he drops out of the block with the game in front of him to play the pass. Yeah. That's what I think, because his best work has always come orchestrating the tempo. Yeah. It hasn't been in terms, if you really look, all the biggest critiques really are what? The separation in terms of transition, his physical compactness under a battle. Is he able to keep the ball, in those physical low blocks? And then finally, is he able to really deliver those, that final ball, I think, from a more floated half space sense, like that Kevin De Bruyne, Trent type, that real final pass killer in all phases. Those are the criticisms of Odegaard. But then, if I'm being fair, Odegaard's best season for Arsenal was not the best season for Sociedad in his career. his best season outside of Arsenal has actually been as a true 10 at Sociedad. It was with Isaac. That was actually his best individual season until he came to Arsenal. Now, my struggle with this, mate, is I think he can do it. But can he do it in the Premier League?
That's what I was just going to mention, George. It's a different level of intensity, you know, and yeah, go.
And that's why, though, I think he drops out of the block. I actually don't think this is something that Odegaard loves to do, but it's more of a league adaptation that he had to make, because when he is higher in those zones, that's something that he struggles with. Mm-hmm. I think ultimately, when you look at Zubamendi, mate, for me, I just see a double pivot player. I prefer a more physical profile fundamentally in my double pivot, but I think undoubtedly this is a double pivot player. I don't think it's a single anchor. I don't think it's somebody who, by the way, he maybe can do the Jorginho versus Liverpool role every once in a while, but this isn't a long-term 8. This isn't somebody that, is... he does his best work together with a partner. And, Declan Rice, I think together they complement and make a beautiful partnership. Yeah, they are the best of each other, really. But it does give me questions as to the role and whether or not Martin Odegaard can adapt. Because I think if he's unable to adapt, we ironically have a lot of 10s, mate. Like you look in theory and in profile, Fabio Vieira, who has had a very difficult time at Arsenal, does he suddenly look at the role change and say, oh, wow? Does Ethan Nwaneri look at that role change and say, wow? Does Max Dowman, the 15-year-old that's been sent to Dubai, look at that and say, wow? Like there is actually a lot of true 10s in the squad. Like this move benefits a lot of players, but it doesn't benefit our captain. And that's a serious discussion, because you have a look at, for me, he has a lot of ability to transfer to the left. I've always said pairing him with a runner could really improve his versatility and his adaptability. Do we see some of that happening potentially? Do we see him also being an option, by the way, in the double pivot, something that I don't think a lot of people have actually mentioned? So just as much as Zubamendi is a deep-lying playmaker who is a little bit more right-footed, could Martin Odegaard not transition to that long-term and be a deep-lying playmaker on his own? It's something I predicted he could to last in the squad a little longer. But yeah, mate, I think these are all questions. These are all valid questions that are going to come. And I'd like to see it better in preseason, because I don't think he also fits a diamond.
Yeah, do you know what it is, George? It's kind of like, so when you think of Martin Odegaard as a deep line playmaker and you have Zubamendi into the fold, you're kind of falling into that Jorginho Zinchenko type of camp in terms of when you have that kind of pivot, let's say, and then obviously you've got massive concerns in transition and going back to goal. So there's concerns there. I mean, if he's with a Declan Rice, I think that's a really complementary partnership. Declan Rice being on the right, Odegaard being on the left. I think that's a really good opportunity to have that as a pivot. But I think with Odegaard, the point about transitions is very interesting, because I remember the Brighton game, and when we had obviously the Declan Rice scandalous decision of the delaying restart, and like a lot of people around me were thinking in that game, like, who's going to come off? And everyone's saying, I think it was like Havertz will come off or Trossard will come off, and I was like, no, it won't be any of those two. It'll be Martin Odegaard. Martin Odegaard will be coming off, because the game doesn't suit his needs in that type of moment. In down to 10 men and a red card, when you're talking about who are the best options Arsenal have to combat that game state from an attacking point of view, Bukayo Saka is your best player. You don't sub him off. Never. Not in that moment. Not in any moment when you need a goal. Kai Havertz is your release valve. He's your best release valve forward out of all the options that we have. And Martinelli's pace is needed. So Martin Odegaard becomes null and void in that situation. So then we go back to scenarios in which Arsenal are looking to thrive upon transitions. Odegaard being as more of a number 10 means he's going to be higher, and he's going to be the one looking to try and finish the move off. Can he do that? I think he can do it okay, but the best way to use him is when he's the guy who is deeper and he plays that first ball over the top to get us going. Like, think back to the Martinelli goal against Brighton all those years back, when Odegaard picks it up through the left hand side and he hits it really well with great weight, and Martinelli's in. That's where Odegaard's at his best. So there's a lot of different things that Odegaard will be tasked to do in this sort of role change. And I said, I don't think neither of us believe he can't do it, but can he do it to the level that we demand? That is the question mark. That's certainly for me. I'm leaving it out there where I want to see it. I want to see it next season. Let's see what happens. But I can't come here and say confidently that I think he can do it to a better level than other seasons he's had at Arsenal, i.e. 23-24, where it was a different role to a traditional 10.
Right. And I agree with you. I agree. And I think it's gonna come for questions further down the line. But mate, fundamentally, when I'm having a look at the squad in general and I'm looking at next steps, do you share my concern as far as these wage concerns and whether or not, in order to take the next step, when we're looking at trying to create a sustainable squad down the line, right? And who for you is in trouble? Because I know it's too bad Alex isn't here, and I'm sure we'll have a bigger discussion on the Martinelli of it all. But we've got a way to define our attacking identity. For you, can I ask you, ideally, what are the types of players that you want recruited? And do you agree that it has to be 2 seriously high-profile players that come into the attack?
I've always been open to many possibilities. Like I've always been someone who's invested in talent, hands down. Even with the Sesko argument, we both spoke about Sesko all those years before, and we still share very similar thoughts in terms of how raw he is. But it's kind of like, for me, if you invest in that talent, yes, there's going to be teething issues in the short term, but but you will reap the rewards eventually, as you see with Alexander Isak, for example. And you kind of invest in that talent early before the finances become excessive. So I'm very much of that idea that I'm happy for that. But I do think we need one ready-made star to come in to give us that quality. And that's where I stand on it. I think in terms of actual attributes, I think this team still lacks a lot of pace in behind. I think that threat and that ability to kind of stretch teams and force them to drop deeper, as opposed to those very physical mid-blocks that you see from Newcastle, that you see from Inter Milan, Atletico Madrid, from Arsenal's perspective, Bayern Munich. These are our tactical kryptonites. And I think having natural runners and players who can stretch that back line with ferocity is something that is going to help Arsenal massively. And there's a lot of options there. That's why I never, and I know you don't, because you have a lot of players in mind, I don't focus on one specific player and say, we need to get him.
Yeah.
I think it's very much, look at the team, what it needs. It's a team that lacks a lot of pace, in my opinion. It's a very ball-to-feet type of team across the front line. We need some runners, and I think that is what is going to take Arsenal to another level, especially in terms of when we talk about Arsenal's press being fantastic, best in the world, in my opinion. I maintain that. And statistically as well, from Mark stats, this season, right, in terms of how aggressive Arsenal are in their line height, do you know how many teams hold a more aggressive line height, defensive line, than Arsenal in Europe's top 5? And bearing in mind the fact that Arsenal have played a lot of minutes down to 10 men as well. There's only one team. Bayern Munich, that's it. No other team plays with a stronger line height than Arsenal, and that gives you a little bit of an insight of how aggressive we are in the press. But what follows after we win it, I think there's things we can do better from a coaching perspective, but I generally think that the biggest driver will be better quality. And I think someone like, as you've mentioned before, an Mbeumo or a Semenyo, people who are very direct and very decisive in transition, with that pace, that gives Arsenal an extra edge, and it's going to be able to improve their game model. So, yeah.
My biggest thing is making Arsenal use the transitions they create to count. We are, the best pressing team in the world. Why? For me, it makes zero sense, okay, that you have platformed yourself as the best out-of-possession team in the world with the best press in the world, and you don't make use of the chances that you create. Yeah. Turning those turnovers into shots are the critical thing. I've called it transitional inevitability. Still maintain that. There's a lot of ways to solve it, but fundamentally our efficiency in transitions and creating dangerous shots from turnovers in transition is the next step. I think if Arsenal make that a superpower, that for me is what defines this team and takes them to the next level. I think there's other things for us to fix, but for me that's the biggest point of improvement, because I don't know about you, but I'm having a look at the league, and do you not think Mikel is very pissed off that other teams have bigger transitional threat than Arsenal? You're looking at Bournemouth,
Forest,
Newcastle, Forest,
Brighton.
Mate, I think that for me, if there's levels of improvement, we're a mid-table club as far as transition efficiency goes.
If that
could be even lower. Yeah. So improving that to top 4 or one of the best in the league is the biggest jump. I agree. Can we access zone 14 better? Yes. I still think, by the way, especially over the last month and a half, maybe this is a data pod question for you guys, but I feel that's jumped up in the league. And our access of central areas has hugely increased in the last month and a half. So for me, it's no longer something of having, the worst in the league at that specific quality. I think it's really improved. Now, for me, it's just the transitions that the only thing that are lacking. But guys, we've been waffling for a good hour now. We're going to transition to your questions. I think I've got something fired up, but maybe you can have a look over on the Twitter and stoke up your fires there. But the first question that we're going to have is Chris Tills from Discord. Thank you for your question, mate. What are your realistic expectations for the season going forward? As Rohan is kind of looking at that, I'll give you my answer. Okay. I don't agree on giving up on the season. I think this is probably one of the weakest mentality shifts that I've seen online that I'm going to call out, in my opinion. I think that this idea that Arsenal should give up on a season that has 6 points with Liverpool, if you have a look at their schedule and the amount of games that they play in the next 3 to 4 weeks, compare that to Arsenal, the amount of difficult games that they have, and you're going to sit there and say, there's no way that we can capitalize. I don't agree. I think there's a lot of twists and turns. And this idea that Liverpool were 7 points ahead in March, mate, of last year, and fell to 7 points behind Arsenal. And we're sat here with a 6-point difference that could be 9 with a game in hand. I'm sorry. That, for me, 7 versus 9 points is not cataclysmic. I wasn't seeing this same anxiety and panic last year. Everyone was still worried about City, by the way, and their lead was bigger than 7 points. And there was this inevitability that City will come back and win it. And guess what? They did.
Yeah.
But my point is they came back from a higher position of being behind than Arsenal were. Yeah. So why is it that they were given that benefit of the doubt and Arsenal aren't? I'll tell you why. It's the fact that they were three-peat winners. They've won all these trophies and all of this. But the pure maths aren't different.
Do you know what it is, though,
the maths totals
maybe perhaps from what people feel, obviously, and there's a lot of context. We've said it many times in terms of the turbulence that Arsenal have endured this season, whether it's refereeing decisions with red cards to the number of injuries that has prevented us from developing any sort of continuity in terms of team lineups and therefore performances. Perhaps the worry people have is the lack of belief of Arsenal going on a run, isn't it? And that for me is kind of like, the biggest regret that I'll have from now to the end of the season is if Arsenal aren't able to put a run in that gives them a chance, right? Let's say, I think Liverpool will drop points. I've maintained that. I don't think Arsenal will win the league. I felt, for me, when Saka went down, that really hurt me, and I felt it's going to be difficult. But the worst thing that could happen is Liverpool falter, but their faltering is still enough to get them over the line relative to Arsenal not being able to put a run together. That will be the biggest frustration. And that's why I think, for me, it's kind of like, use this break to mentally check out, to come back fresh, and go hard from now to the end of the season, because the fixture schedule is looking better for us. Our first 2 games are very favourable. Leicester away, playing against one of the worst team, the worst team in the league, alongside Southampton, and then you've got West Ham at home. Whereas Liverpool have got to go to Goodison Park. So you've got an opportunity there to close the gap a bit, potentially if Everton do something. But that would be the biggest regret for me. Is if we said it before, in terms of the owners and the ambition, I didn't see that ambition in the January window. It felt to me that they're throwing the season away, and I don't like that. I don't like this idea of throwing seasons away midway through, even if we've gone through a lot of turbulence with obviously going out of both domestic cup competitions. But still give yourself a chance from now to the end of the season, and just be there. If Arsenal go on a run, a really good run, but Liverpool go on a really good run, you say fair enough. You leave nothing. You have nothing to regret, barring things that happened earlier in the season, that some of the stuff that wasn't out of our control. Some that was with our control, but ultimately that's where I stand. It's like, I just want this team to go hard and be in with a chance. That's all.
I don't know, mate. I fundamentally feel that Arsenal and this squad, this potential, I'm not ready to give up on it.
Yeah.
I'm simply not. Yeah. And until it's mathematically impossible, that's where I want. So I want us to fight. I want us to actually make Liverpool nervous. Yeah. That's what I want. Yeah. Whether we do it or we don't, I'm happy to have the consequences of that in that conversation a little bit further down. But this idea that Arsenal should just limp biscuit, lay their chest up with their legs up and concede the lead. Can I just make a quick rallying cry for 1 second? You are the Arsenal. Fans, remember that. If you want us to be the Madrids of this world and you want us to sit there and do that, then I'm sorry. Buck up, zip up your zipper, and don't go and sit there and limit the team off of what you've seen. Yeah. And, you need to have a little bit of a better mentality if you think that the league is completely done, because I'm sorry, things have happened that are weirder in the past. And this team has shown you a level of consistency and threat that it can do these things. And when you start to add the people returning back to injuries, you start to add this team and the faith that it can show you, that for me is enough to sit there and say, make a run of it. Now, I think in the Champions League, I have a little bit higher expectations. Mate, I want a minimum semifinal appearance. I'm not even having quarterfinals. I don't care who we get. This team is, for me, one of the top 4 teams in the world. And especially on the side of the draw that we're at, by the way. I think a semifinal is more than fair as far as a minimum appearance. Yeah. I don't know if I've seen a recruitment that makes me say I'm guaranteeing a trophy, because again, we didn't buy a forward. If I sat there and we did those things, I would be a little bit bigger about my expectations. But yeah, I would say minimum semifinal, and I want to make Liverpool nervous. I want to put the gap to within 3 to 5 points by April.
So what you're saying is title parade in May?
There's a damn chance. Buck up, and the Arsenal will give you some reason to replay your faith. That's what I'm saying.
Parade in May. Let's go. Parade in May.
Absolutely. But mate, do you have any questions from X?
Yeah, it's from Azarius on X, and this was something that we wanted to talk about actually anyway, so we can get into it. And he asks, can we talk about Miles Lewis-Skelly again? And where do we see him settle in the team? Same with Ethan. So our £200 million Hale-End products, where do you see them in the near future, the present?
Okay. They're both Hale-Ends?
Yeah.
I mean, mate, Ethan... Let's review. Let's recap. Okay? Ethan is on course for potentially breaking Michael Owen and Wayne Rooney's record.
Yeah.
Correct? Yeah. I believe he's a couple goals away from Wayne Rooney, a little bit more from Michael Owen. Yeah. But that's the level of talent we're dealing with, right? Miles has walked in on his debut to be the best left back in the league on his debut with the highest dueling percentage wins in the league in that time. Correct?
Yep. Coming up against the likes of Kulusevski, Rodgers, these are some very, very physical ball carriers. The awareness on the back post to fend off the likes of Haaland. These are...
Mate, is Miles a guaranteed starter at this point?
I think he is.
So when you're asking me like how far that I think these two can go, guys, it's ridiculous that we're having this conversation right now, in my opinion. Ethan Nwaneri is the first depth piece, if not the 12th attacker in the squad guaranteed right now. And the only reason he isn't in full time is because, again, he's competing with our captain. He actually is first choice right now with Bukayo Saka out.
Yep.
So, and Miles is first choice left back with Calafiori coming back injury free.
Which is interesting, isn't it?
That's what they've done.
It's interesting because obviously how highly we rate Calafiori. I fell in love with this player watching him for Bologna and the clips that I saw when we were linked to him. But it's interesting now, isn't it? Because we're talking about Miles being a guaranteed starter, and when you look at his performances, and this is where I said, before the Man City game, we both did our starting 11s. And I felt on merit, there is no way Miles can't not start this game. It's just not fair. He has done everything he can within his power in a position that is not his best. And it's not just the on-the-ball stuff that we know he's capable of doing, the ability to receive in the block, turn, drive, carry, and galvanise creativity. It's the off-the-ball things that he's been doing is what you'd expect from a seasoned left-back. A seasoned, defensively astute left-back that he is doing. And then Ethan...
Yeah.
I mean, Mikel showed his intentions with Ethan very early on in the season against Leicester. You know, we needed a goal. Gabriel Jesus was on the bench. Ethan was on the bench. Who does he bring on? He brings on Ethan. That was the intention from the get-go. Yes, we've both felt that he should have started him more in the absence of Ødegaard, but there's no denying that how Arteta rates Ethan so highly that he's trusting him in the most difficult game states. So I think our squad building is very much primed on where we see these two, you know, so...
I think that these two have essentially, and this is the biggest compliment I can give you, in them, they have basically said we don't need to buy an 8 in 10.
I agree.
That's what they've done. So, yeah, from my perspective, mate, that's huge. That's massive. It allows us to focus completely on major additions in the forward line, and it allows us to actually do, what I would hope is finish the goalkeeping rebuild, for God's sakes. I think it just means that they have allowed us this flexibility with 2 100 million pound talents. Yeah. We basically recruited 2 100 million pound midfield talents that we can sit there and say, once we finish the DM replacement, so to speak, we can put all funds towards the forward. And that's where it should go. As far as how much they can take it, mate, I legitimately think that Miles and Ethan could be starters by the end of next season. Like, undisputed starters. I think it could be that drastic. They already are the 12th men, and already Miles is a starter. Miles is already a starter in this team, and Ethan is the 12th man attacker guarantee sub to change a game. I mean... Like, what else do you have to progress as far as that point? Like, Miles has made it.
Yeah.
I mean, Miles is already a starter, and then Ethan just needs to be a starter, technically.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which type of Manchester City team it was. Mikel Arteta had the opportunity to start Calafiori against Manchester City, but he picked Miles Lewis-Skelly. You know, that should speak volumes of how much he rates the talent. But it's interesting because I want to see Calafiori as well. So, because I think Calafiori can have a massive impact from now to the end of the season as well. But this is what the Highlanders are doing. What they're doing is not normal. Yeah. You know, they are providing us with some very interesting conversations in terms of who should be starting. I didn't envisage this at all before the season. You know,
it kind of for me. I just to end this squad building trip. I think you're looking at 2 players that have, again, we're not even talking about Max Dowman, who I think in Dubai at 15, it says everything for as much as they plan for him. I think we've got Saka's backup, mate. I don't think logically, I love Mbeumo, and that's the one thing that I've been really debating recently. I don't think I can logic an Mbeumo with Max and Ethan together. Like, the two of them between the attacking midfield and right-wing solutions. Yeah. You've got 2 players that are going to want cameos, and Ethan has already proven to be a 12th man, period.
Maybe that's an interesting set just to go on Max Dowman, because there is, we could end it on this final question on X from Tolu, and he asks, what's the expectation or pathway into the team for Max Dowman? And obviously, it's very difficult to always confidently predict the trajectory of a 15-year-old. But from what you see in the clips, this isn't a normal 15-year-old. This is a ridiculous talent, and that is why people are having these sorts of conversations, And I mean, that's very interesting in terms of what happens there.
Absolutely. I mean, mate, you're looking at a guy that even to talk about him in the squad building sense is insane. Yeah. I'm uncomfortable doing it, but it's what the club have already done. From their perspective. And Yeah, mate. I'm excited to see what the future holds. There's a lot of stuff to go on. I think the one thing I'll end on is I'm very excited post-Dubai. The Arsenal needs to get back into my system. I need it desperately.
Ben White's got his tan. He's tanned up. He's ready.
He's ready. That guy. I can't wait for him to be back. I think Ben White could be one of my favorite players.
George, where it's like there's that. It's just like a clip where like it's like Ben White and Saka. Saka's on the ball. He's standing up the fullback, and Ben White's like a mile away. He's like, I'm coming, I'm running. And he makes that overlap. I'm just like, oh, I can't wait.
No, class. It's class. And you know what, guys? There's a lot of stuff coming up. So thank you to all the new members that have signed up. So make sure you guys get off to the Patreon. We've got this new collection list, which actually organizes all of our pods, whether it's a youth focus pod, a scouted, a rewatch. So have a look, main pods. It's all kind of organized down there. And of course, we love all you lovely YouTube members that have also decided to kind of join us on there. You can all access the same amount of content down there. And it's a great time to be a part of the Cannon podcast. I'm going to have some content shout out for you this week. So make sure you guys have a look out for that. Thank you, Rohan.
Nice one, mate. Always good to talk.
Always good to talk, exactly. And guys, we're looking forward to the post-Dubai return trip. Thank you for listening, and thanks for keeping it Arsenal.